Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Publication Mentoring Program for Graduate Students, organized by the CLSU Graduate Program Office and the Federation of Graduate Students. Thank you for accepting the invitation to this worthwhile undertaking that will give you a different perspective on how to successfully publish your research project. In this lecture, I will provide some tips on how you are to structure your research articles so they will get the nod of the reviewers of your target journals. I will walk you through the actual research writing process from writing the introduction, doing integrative and critical literature review, choosing the appropriate research methods, and writing the results and discussion. I will also give you some tips on what to avoid when writing research articles for journal submission. At the end of this talk, you will realize that once you devote your time and passion to this undertaking and remains committed to it, research will love you back. So the title of this talk is Structuring Research Articles from Effective Writing to Successful Publishing. I am Joel M. Torres from the Department of Secondary Education, College of Education, Central Luzon State University. Why is it important to structure your research articles the right way? Because that will give you the passport to be published in your target journals. We always hear these sections in a journal article: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So I will begin with giving you some tips on how you are going to organize the first section, which is the introduction. So as reviewer myself, once journals or once articles are submitted, I try to look at the general objectives of the study and try to see if the general objectives of the study are aligned with the specific objectives. And from here, I tend to look at the possible research questions or the research questions that they put in the paper. So from the very beginning that I receive an article for review, I see to it that I'm going to look into if there is a constructive alignment of these research questions with the themes that they put in the related studies. If this research question is related to the design, if this research question has been answered by the right instrument, if the right people were the ones who provided the data, and if they did the right analysis for this particular research question. So it's important that you keep in mind that from the very beginning, you have to lay down everything that you are going to do in this particular article. So it should have a constructive alignment throughout so that we could say, or we could ensure that everything that we put into that particular article is related with one another. Introduction is the most crucial part of the paper. As we say, we have to put our best foot forward. The same principle goes when we write for publication, because deficient and confusing introduction leads to rejection. And as a reviewer myself, when I see an introduction that is not polished, or an introduction that was not able to trace the gap, or that was not able to provide me the right context for this study at the onset or outright, we tend to not accept that particular article. So it's important that when you submit for publication, you make sure that you have well-written introduction. The good thing is that we have Swales Cars model in writing introduction. Why CARS? This is an acronym of creating a research space. It is a model pioneered by John M. Swales in 1981, who investigated the introduction sections of research articles. So I know it's hard to frame or it's hard to draft the introduction of our research articles, but the good thing is that here's a model or here's a template provided by Swales, which we could follow. So let's take a sneak peek of what the Swales Cars model is all about. So in the Swales Cars model, there are 3 moves. And in each of these moves, there are various steps. If we follow it right, we can ensure that our articles have higher possibility of being accepted. So the first move has to do with establishing a territory. The second is establishing a niche. And once you have established the niche, you move to the last one, which is occupying the niche. So in move 1, you are going to provide us a situation. In move 2, you provide the problem. And in move 3, you provide the solution and you evaluate the value of this particular research. So move 1 has 3 steps. One is claiming centrality. When you say you claim centrality in your introduction, at the very onset of your introduction, you're going to say that this particular article that I am writing has to do with this specific topic. So that basically you are coming with territorial boundaries. You are saying that this excludes other disciplines. Or once you have hit a certain discipline, then you also have to tell them that this has a specific subdiscipline, and this subdiscipline is what I am working on with at the moment. So the second step after you establish those territorial boundaries is that you have to come up with topic generalizations. You have to give us an overview on what has been said, what has been found out, what has been established on the topic you are writing about. So you have to provide us an advanced information on those generalizations from the topic that you are writing. And from all these generalizations, from a more general generalization, you move to step 3, which you provide or you survey previous research that has to do with your current topic. Then after you provide us with the situation or the context, then that's a time you come up with the second move, which is establishing a niche or what we call the space or the gap. In move 2, there are 2 steps that we should consider. First is identifying weaknesses. These weaknesses are the ones that we found out once we critically review a certain research article, which is a part of our paper. So it's important that we have to have that particular eyes when it comes to seeing what is lacking in the previous research articles, those that were published that you included in your current paper. So it's important that you look for those methodological gaps, gaps in the findings, gaps in the conclusions. Once you have established that, then you are ready for the second step in your introduction under move 2, which is indicating a research gap. Most of the research articles that are rejected for publication is that they fail to show the gap. They fail to tell us what is lacking in the previous studies that we try to address in the current study. So in research writing, we have to mine that particular gap, and we have to convince the reviewers that there is really that certain space or that certain gap in literature that the current study address. Then after you have showed the problem, then you are ready for move 3, which is occupying the niche. There are 5 steps here. Step 1, A, is outlining the purpose. That's when you share to us the objectives of the study. Step 1B is announcing the main outcome, telling us or giving us an overview on what we are going to expect in your paper. So at the introduction, you have to lay down there what are the things or what are those findings or what are we gonna read in the entire article. Then step 2 is summarizing methods. So you're gonna tell how did you approach the problem or what were those methodology that you included so that to ensure that you were able to answer the problem. Step 3 is you were able to describe the main outcome. You have to provide us a glimpse of what would be what would the outcomes be like. And step 4 is, of course, telling to us what's the value of this research. Why is it worthwhile to basically invest or engage into this kind of study? And the last step in the introduction is indicating the structure of the article. So guiding us, what are the salient parts of this article? Of course, you have the research questions. You have there some related studies that you're gonna put also within the introduction. Then you're gonna tell what are other parts that we're gonna expect from here. Okay, so when it comes to writing the review of related literature and studies, which is actually embedded within your introduction, it's important that we do it the right way. It's like we are doing Marites, but Marites in a scholarly manner. You are trying to make some inquiry on what other scholars have done in the past. So doing RRL is like doing Marites in a scholarly manner. So it's like you are showing to us your ability to gather information from previous scholars. So in writing literature review, you have to show to us that you are citing, you are following the works of the rock stars in your discipline, the works of the authorities in your field. Again, as a reviewer myself, once I look at a certain article, I see to it or I check who are the sources. You have to make sure that your sources are the ones who did seminal works in this particular discipline or are the ones who have written much articles in the field you are exploring. It's like when you do RRL, you have to stand on the shoulder of the giants because as beginning researchers, we have not yet produced much articles, and we have to really rely on what the previous scholars have found out. And from what they have found out, then you really have to benchmark on that. You have to zero in on those findings. And that would be your springboard eventually on trying to establish what your current inquiry is all about. So doing RRL is not just searching, it is a set of interrelated skills. So the good thing now is there are a lot of repositories. There are a lot of those sites we could search for articles, but we have to make sure that when we do it, we do the appropriate related literature literature and studies needed for our articles. It's not just a matter of searching. It's a matter of you trying to input the right words in the search bar in Google Scholar, in Eric, and other repositories that we may have. It's trying to play up with words, trying to put the right phrases, the right things, the right titles within the search bar. Because whatever you input in the search bar will bring you to a certain article that could either be useful or not to your paper. So you have to make sure that your themes, when you do research, is that they are related to the current inquiry. That's why, if you would remember earlier, I've shown you the matrix with the research questions, with the key concepts, because from the research questions that you have, you'll just gonna like you'll just gonna rewrite it in a sentence form, and that research question is the one you're gonna put in the search bar, so that it would be easier for you to look for those related studies. So once you come up with related studies that you have, you put them in this particular matrix. So what I usually do is that, say for example, I have 3 research questions. So I make sure that for each of the research questions, I have like 5 or more journal articles related to that research question. And I would put this in this particular table. I already write the APA citation, both for the in-text and for the references. Then I will get the research design of that particular literature that I'm going to include, or that particular study that I'm going to include in the paper. Then I'm also going to put the research locale, the sample that they use, the data collection, the tools and data analysis. Then I look at the findings, and I also take note of the limitation of that particular study. So with this particular table, or with this particular matrix that you will use when you write the literature review, it would give you an easy access on what to include in the final manuscript. So of course, it will also give you an easy way of record keeping of all those materials or all those literature that you have surveyed. And it would also be easier for you if reported it this way, okay? Because this will avoid the monotonous reporting of related studies. Because one of the common problems we find, or we tend to see into beginning researchers, is that their RRL always begins with the phrase like according to, for authors, and the like. So it sounds monotonous in that way. So with this particular matrix, it would be easier for you to have variety in presentation of your RRL. RRL is not just merely enumeration. That's what we basically find in beginning researchers. They just enumerate, they just put all those findings without basically connecting this to the first and to the other, without having that certain smooth transition of ideas. When you do the RRL, you have to make sure that you lump all similar findings. Then after you have lumped similar findings, then you trace individual findings that are related to those lump findings. And you also have to show to us the different findings, contradicting findings. Who are the authors who say the same things? Who are those who do not concur with what has been previously said? So I suggest that when you do the RRL, you have to put this in this particular matrix prior to putting that in your final manuscript. So when the reviewer asks you, for an instance, to okay, I think you have to add more RRL on this particular subheadings or in this particular subtopic within your topic. So it would be easier on your end to really access it with this particular matrix. Now, literature review is critical analysis of existing research in your field. So it allows you to gain a critical understanding of your field. It gives us the opportunity to think about what has been done in the field. You have to look for similarities, patterns, trends, and differences across existing research. That's why, again, it's not just merely enumeration of findings. You have to be critical here in surveying what has been done in the discipline you are researching. So, in doing literature review, it is also expected of us that we highlight both the strengths and weaknesses of existing research. We can only do that if we look at each of the articles critically. We can only do that if we look at it in a way that we say that what is lacking or what are the methodological concerns of this article that I am reviewing. Now, because by establishing strengths and weaknesses, you will be able to think about what has not or what needs to be done in your field. Again, it's important that in your literature review, you should be able to establish the gap, because the gap in the literature is your justification for research. Once you have established that, and once you have come up with research questions that are basically an answer or answers to this gap that you have established, then it would be easier for you to proceed throughout your work. So in doing RRL, you have to be a critical reader. So you have to look at the research objectives of the ones you are reading. Is the research aim achieved? If how did they do it? Are there any problems with their methodology? So you have to put these questions in mind before diving into the actual reading of those materials that you're going to survey. So you have to put this in mind before reading that I'm going to look for the objectives of these articles that I'm going to review. Then I'm going to see if these are achieved or not, or are there problems with their methods, or the models that they use, is that weak or is that a strong model, or is that an appropriate model for the study? Because sometimes it's just a matter of them trying to fill in that particular part without basically trying to really put in mind or to be very much mindful on whether they put the right model for their study or not. It's just a matter of just complying for this part. So you have to be critical on that. When you review, you have to see, was it a strong or a weak model? Now, you also have to put in mind when you are doing the review that how will this research help you with your own research? What are you taking from it? What can you take from it? Or what how could you benefit from that particular article that you are reviewing? Or what are those aspects of the article you are reviewing are you going to adopt? Or what are you going to avoid? Or what are you doing differently? So all those things have to be answered while you are doing the critical reading of the literature. So you also have to ask yourself, who are the key players in my field? What are the main ideas or debates in my field? And how have these ideas changed over time? You have to have that timeline on whether the ideas that you are tracking down are still acceptable at the moment, or are there newer ideas, or is this superseded by someone, or is this basically questioned by someone? So eventually, if this is questioned by a certain individual, then who are you going to follow if there are contradicting opinions or ideas in your discipline? So it's like you have to track in that uh related studies part of your paper, how have these ideas changed over time? You also have to ask yourself and to illustrate in your review that if there are any problems, if there are any concerns with these ideas or debates, and look also again if there are problems with the methodology of the articles you are reviewing. And finally, you have to put in mind what are you doing differently in your current paper. So it's also important that you always have to go back to the primary source. Okay. So we try to avoid secondary sources as much as possible. If you're writing for journal articles or for journals, it's important that you have to go back to the primary source. If the primary source is available or is accessible, go back to the primary source and avoid just merely relying to secondary sources, because reviewers themselves would also be mindful on that, on how many percentage or how much of the entire article basically devoted their time on secondary, tertiary sources, and a little of the composition of the entire article would be only devoted to primary. But what we're suggesting is that you basically go to primary sources. Okay, go back to the primary sources as much as possible, because you can get the right uh the right findings or the right ideas from the primary sources. Because the problem with secondary sources sometimes is that they may misquote, or they may not fully capture a certain previous finding by the primary source. So to be safe, to be sure that you are doing it the right way, you have to really go back on the primary source. Okay, next, it's also important that you write the method section right. Okay, sometimes when you are in the method sections, it seems that you already consume so much of your energy in writing the introduction, and you tend to do method section briefly, or you tend to rush when you're in the method sections. But it's equally important that when you reach the method section, you have to again walk us through, help the readers or help the reviewers understand how did you solve or how did you answer the problems you have raised earlier. It's equally important for us to know what were those steps you did, so that you're gonna provide answers to the inquiries you have raised. So in the method section, you have here the research design, the participants, the research instruments, the validation of instruments, data gathering, and analysis of data. So you should explain very well in the research design section why it is the most appropriate design for this particular inquiry. You have to convince the reviewers of the journal that this is the right design for this line of research or this kind of research. Then you go to the participants or the respondents section. Again, you have to give detailed background on how they were chosen, why they were chosen, why are they the most suitable participants of respondents or respondents for that particular study. So you have here to basically tell what makes them qualify for this kind of study. It's not like merely saying, I'm going to have this number of respondents for this study, but you have to go beyond that. You have to provide justification on what are those selection criteria that you have considered for them to be part of the study? Again, you have to, uh, from here, you have to make sure that you are recruiting the right participants who will provide you the kind of answers or the kind of responses related to the study. And they are the most reliable participants or respondents that you'll have. Then you have here the research instruments. You're gonna tell here whether you are gonna adopt, or it's like you're gonna do a researcher-made instrument. So whenever whichever track or whichever path you're gonna follow from here, it's equally important that you're gonna say or you're gonna justify why I'm gonna adopt or why you're gonna adopt and or why are you gonna create your own instrument. So it's just a matter of you trying to reason out why adopting or doing your own instrument is the right one to do for this research. Then if you adapted an instrument or if you modified an instrument or if you came up with your own instrument, it's also important that you walk us through you walk us through or you give us a background on how the validation of that instrument, how did it go through? Who were the ones who validated it? Are they reliable or are they the right persons to validate the instrument? So, of course, in that particular section, in the validation of instrument section, you have to also say there, you have to give us a little background on the the qualifications of your validators. Then the other part would be on the data gathering. How did you go about with getting all of those data from your respondents? What were those steps that you did for you to collect those data? And the last one is the analysis of data. It's also necessary for you to give a detailed presentation on how data were analyzed in the paper, on what were those, what statistical tests did you use, or what qualitative analysis framework did you do so that you were able to analyze your data. And when you write the results section, what are those things that you have to avoid? First is uh, attempting or discussing to interpret your results, ignoring negative results. Sometimes when you have negative results in your findings, you tend to shy away from that, or you tend to neglect the negative results. But it's also necessary for you to explain why results happen to be that way, or why results turn out to be that. So you don't just basically ignore them. In the discussion of your results, you have an opportunity to develop the story found in the data, and you have to make connections between the results of your analysis and the existing theory and results, or the theory and research. So you have to weave this time. What are your findings? How do this relate with the previous literature? How does this relate with what you know? How does this relate with the existing theory? So it's a matter of you going back to your previous studies that you have included in the manuscript. So one of the common problems with beginning researchers is that they just present the result and do not relate it with the previous literature. So it's your opportunity to theorize. It's your opportunity to either agree, contradict, or to support, corroborate previous findings. So you have the opportunity to develop the story in the results section. What are the concerns to attend to in the research section? So how did your actual results compare with what you expected? So there are what we call surprising results. And when the results are surprising, then how are you going to make sense of that? Then another concern that we could attend here is that, how do your results compare with the results of other researchers? So That's why the related studies that you had included in the introduction section matter, because they are the ones you're gonna refer to. You always have to go back to them once in a while, because you're gonna compare your results with what other researchers found out. Then another concern that you're going to attend to is that how might you explain any unexpected results? How might you test those potential explanations? And based on your results, what question or questions would you logically want to ask next? And from there, you are providing uh, other researchers, the ones who will be reading your work, with the research uh, gap as well. So you're also providing them with the research opportunities. What are you gonna explore as a follow-up study, as someone that they're gonna, if they're gonna follow your work, what is the next thing that they're gonna do? So another thing which is important in publishing is that the citation format that you're gonna use, both for the index and for the reference. Again, as a reviewer, once I receive an article for review, I browse the reference section and I see whether the reference section is scholarly prepared or not. If at a glance I saw that there are questions, or the way they prepared the reference and even the index citations did not follow the prescribed 7th edition guidelines, then I would have to think twice whether to accept this or not, because I have this particular understanding that if they did not prepare the reference section the right way, then how much more the entire article or the entire manuscript? So you have to give the reviewer the impression that, oh, even in the reference section, they did it right. They did it scholarly. They prepared it the way that they should be prepared. So that basically gets a nod, or that will give their approval in a way. So what are the common problems of researchers? One is that, and these are the things that you should be avoiding when you are to publish your work. One is that topics and research questions are too broad, in which they want to answer so many concerns, or they want to answer the big problems. Well, in fact, they could not provide answers to all those questions. So another thing, another problem that we see in beginning researchers is that the surveyed literature and studies lack the relevance to the current research. So it's always important that there's that particular relationship with the related studies. That's why they are related from the word itself. You have to make sure that the ones you are putting in the manuscript, the ones that you're going to survey, are the ones that have contributions to the overall direction of the article, because RL will make or unmake the entire manuscript. So make sure that they have that particular connection. Another thing that we see, and basically this leads to rejection, is that theoretical framework lacks relationship with the current research. So they just put a theory which is basically in, I don't know, at some point, or they do not relate well with the current study. So how are you going to make sense of that? So it's like, if you put this theoretical framework, you have to make sure that the TF, or the theoretical framework that you're going to use, will give us the overall direction of the study. And finally, conceptual framework is not based on the theoretical framework, because from here, you have to make sure that the variables in your conceptual framework are the ones that you derive from the theories that you are adopting for your study. Then the question now is, what makes a paper publishable in a reputable and high impact journals? First is that followed guidelines to authors, professional presentation, and followed guidelines to authors. So once you have the articles ready for submission, you have to read the guidelines intended for authors, or the journal style that they are requiring you to follow. So, because if you submit it without basically referring to the guidelines they are prescribing, then that will give you little chance of being accepted. Another thing is that it fall under fields prescribed by the journal. So sometimes you get rejected because you submitted to the wrong journal, or it's not within the scope of their journal. That's why they don't accept your article. And finally, it is intelligible and well written English. You have to make sure that it went through copy editing, English editing, or at least someone who is knowledgeable on the language should have looked at it. And before you submit it, they have commented over it, or they have worked, or they have done something on your draft, so that you are confident that it's intelligible. When you say intelligible, it's something that can be understood and it's well structured, okay, following the standard English that we say. Reminders for you to be able to learn how to publish is that you have to read many journal articles, be a reflective reader, learn from the good as well as the bad ones. So the journal should be part of your day-to-day lives. It should be part of your system every day. You have to, once in a while, you have to read articles, because there's no better way of learning how to write by ex- other than exposing yourself to the articles, or uh, get following those who are the ones who are already established in the field. Improve your English. Another thing is that learn to accept rejection and criticism. It's not every day that your paper get accepted. There are a lot of times that you will be rejected, and you learn from the comments. When you get rejected, you have to go back to the comments and see what are the areas, or in what particular aspects are you going to improve, and become a reviewer early in your career. And quality, not quantity, is everything. So getting published in a nutshell, first is you have to aim for the right journal. See the scope of the journal where you're going to submit your drafts. Then balance ambition and realism. Uh, as a, as beginners in the field, you have to really look for the journals that you're gonna be submitting your manuscript. Hone your manuscript, then expect to revise, gain experience, and finally keep on trying. So I hope this lecture at some point help you to be able to publish your works in journals. So thank you very much for listening. Have a good day, everyone.